Welcome to the Texas Conflict Coach radio program. If you have ever experienced or engaged in destructive or unresolved conflict, then you know it leads to broken relationships, distrust, and damaging results. Our program will help you manage and resolve conflict effectively with strategies, valuable resources, and support. I am your host, Patty Porter. My guest hosts, Dina Zameta and Stephen Kotev, along with our guest experts, will share our experiences, raise your awareness, and give you food for thought. We will share with you problem-solving strategies no matter what your situation is. At work, with neighbors or friends, family, and as partners. Tune in or join in the conversation every Tuesday evening. So family businesses are the backbone of many world economies. And in the U.S., family businesses employ nearly 63% of the workforce and contribute 50% of the gross domestic product. They are also responsible for nearly 78% of new job creation. It is highly likely that many people listening tonight may be part of a family business or will be working for a family business enterprise. Now, there are some good reasons why family businesses contribute so much, and that creates special conditions, challenges, and characteristics which make mediation very effective in assuring that this specialness, if you will, is not consumed by disputes. So in our episode tonight, Families Mean Business, I have with me Amanda Bucklow, who will discuss what this specialness is, how to identify the early warning signs for emerging problems, and what you can do about them wherever you are in the business. Now, who is Amanda Bucklow? She has been in full-time practice as a commercial mediator since 1995 and is specialized in negotiation and conflict resolution for most of her working life. She has worked in 3 family businesses, including her own. She is also an educator and entrepreneur, but those 2 roles mean that she is constantly pushing the boundaries on how mediators are taught their skills so that they are able to practice in the real world as she would call it, a safe pair of hands. Her active practice as a mediator feeds the development of her teaching and vice versa. She actually comes from us right now from England, and so she's up early morning talking to us live. We are taking live callers, and so I see that we have some folks in the chat room already. We encourage you to leave your questions and comments there and engage with us. You can certainly call in and speak with us at 347-324-3591, and we have our graduate students who are Twittering tonight using the hashtag TCCRadio. You can also follow Amanda Bucklow at that name, Amanda Bucklow, Bucklow, or TX Conflict Coach, and those are our Twitter handles, so if you want to join our Twitter feed, you can do that. And again, TCC Radio is the hashtag we're using. Amanda, welcome to the program tonight.
Thank you, Patty. I'm really, really pleased to be with you.
Well, I've enjoyed following you through our social media networks and some of the programs that you've, even coordinated with Tammy Linsky, another well-known conflict management practitioner, coach in our field. And so I really feel so honored that after all this time to have you on the program to share your expertise around family businesses. And so you are known in your line of work, in working with unique family business relationships with many challenging personalities. And the stronger the personality, the more difficult it is to approach these individuals. We all know that. We always say people with personality challenges. So I guess my first question for you is, what is the passion for you in engaging and assisting with these types of individuals in these family businesses?
Well, first of all, the figures that you quoted in your introduction are absolutely key. Family businesses are really the backbone of business here in the UK, certainly in the US, and elsewhere around the world. So they make a huge, huge contribution. Those businesses are started by people for various reasons, and it takes a lot of guts. And it takes a lot of strength and courage to build a business from scratch. And that tends to lead to very particular kinds of personalities, very robust personalities with strong views. And I like that, you know. I often say that behind every strong personality is an important fear, actually, which is equally an important driver for their behavior. I believe that everybody needs support, even the most individual of individuals, and their influence and their particular style ripples widely across the organisation and indeed the community, because they're often great philanthropists and they're very often involved in lots of community projects. Interesting people.
Now, what is, any personal story that you have that you would like to share in why this drives your own passion, why you like these robust views and, these people that are very courageous in starting their own business, and certainly you have been involved in a number of your own businesses and families. So any story that you would like to share now to help connect listeners to who you are?
Well, yes, I've had a 3D view of family business. First of all, I worked in my father's business, which was relatively new at the time, and I saw how he operated at home and how he operated at work. And that was a really valuable experience in my working life because it happened very early in my working life. So him, I recognized that the driver was to be a good provider. He was motivated by providing for his family. And he was also motivated by doing his own thing, walking his own path. And I recognized that early on. The second was a large family business which had gone into being a PLC, and that was led by a second-generation leader. Now, in becoming a public company, the transition for him was very difficult because he was no longer the key man in the family. He was now having to perform according to a PLC. And I'm afraid he had the ego for it and the drive, but not the interpersonal skills, and that had a dramatic effect on the fortunes of the business. Then the third family business was in the startup of it, and it was actually my in-law family business, if you like. So I got to see what it was like to be an outsider, even though I had a huge role to play. I got to see what it means to be responsible for many employees during economic crisis, which was the last one in the early 90s, the late 80s, 90s. And the effects of relationships on the vision and the direction of the business, it was huge. So that's my 3D view, and I think that's what makes me perhaps a little bit unusual in having had all that frontline experience, and I like to put that into play.
Well, we're going to talk about that very specifically. So not only, do you like working with these individuals, you have that, as you said, your 3D view and experience of working in family businesses, either as an outsider or insider to the family. And then you got into this work of conflict management and mediation. So let's talk a little bit about that. We've addressed family mediation, all kinds of various mediation practices, but one of the things we want to make a distinction here is what is the difference between a family business mediation or a commercial mediation? Because I think sometimes people think, we have a family business, we have a dispute, let's go the commercial mediation route. And I think this is kind of where the specialness falls into place, but help us understand that.
Yeah, I think you're right, Patty. And, this is a very good distinction for the listeners to understand. In commercial mediation, the disputes are often in litigation, not always, but often. And the parties are represented by legal professionals. The need to continue the business relationship is not always a consideration. It can be, but, it's not front and center. And a mediator should never assume that what the parties say at the beginning, which is, I never want to see that person again, living or dead, is what they really mean, So in commercial mediation, there is a kind of distance which makes for a different, a more corporate approach. And I guess there's more room for objectivity and pragmatism there, or at least the commercial parties can resort to that quite easily. Now, I think the specialness of family business is more often to do with the influence of the founder. They are invariably very strong personalities with specific traits and approaches, which may not work anywhere else but in this business, and arguably there are many like that. A famous British writer, which I think people will recognise, Beatrix Potter, of Benjamin Rabbit, etc. She once said, I hold that a strongly marked personality can influence descendants for generations. I think that really hits the mark for family business. So, one, understanding the background and motivations of the founder is part of understanding that influence. That influence can last well beyond their retirement and even many, many years after their death. It then becomes embellished with story and memory. And, often these people can become icons, and people dare not go against what their particular values were, even though it might be 50, 60 years after their death. And I've coined a phrase to describe this influence. It's the phantom leader. And it describes the characteristic or the experience of the influence of the founder or the leader of the company who has retired, but he somehow still has a say in everything that goes on. And I think the other thing about the specialness of family business is that there's a very distinct process. As the business grows and the years go by, the leadership is shared. Now, that can be shared or it can be fragmented, depending on how well that is done. And the influence or the leadership is fought over by siblings, children, and eventually even cousins. And I think those relationship dynamics are really key to ensuring that the business can be sustained and provide and meet the expectations of the shareholders. So this is very different. Family business exists to provide the families a living. That's their purpose. Yes, that's profit, but it can be a lifestyle. Whereas ordinary corporates, they're not set up to create a lifestyle.
Okay, so a very big distinction, and I love the idea of the specialness of family business. It's not to diminish that they're not huge, but because family businesses can be literally very, very small to multi-billion-dollar business enterprise for many generations. And so I like the way of you describing the specialness and the strong, very strong influence of the original founder, whether it's family dynamics, traditions, the stories that are told and passed down from generations, the values that are put into place. Do you have a case study or story which kind of really impacts family business in terms of, as we'll start to get into some early warning signs and symptoms, if you will, of emerging problems. But do you have an example or story which really impacts the family business that you want to share at this point?
Yeah, I have a very good one, actually. A very successful business, moving currently in the second generation, but considering the third generation, which is the most difficult transition, actually, because you're going to many more people. And the founders are still very much alive, although, in very advanced years, all their marbles still there and still very interested. And very, very strong people who were major pioneers when they started out. And when I was talking to the second and the third generations, independently and in the usual Mediator way of, confidentiality and not sharing anything, the most remarkable thing was that absolutely everybody, every single one I spoke to, mentioned how they were so grateful to Granny and Grandpa Their values were very, very much enshrined in the current approach to running the business. And it was almost as if everybody had lost their own sense of direction in the spirit of following in Granny and Grandpa's footsteps. And it was good, but they had lost their own sense of themselves in walking this particular story. And I think that the Phantom Leader was very much there. They were really still around, very close, and having a strong influence. And their message was, I don't want to be involved anymore. I don't want to be involved anymore. It's time you guys took over. It's time you took responsibility. That was the verbal message that was going out. But of course, when the families were engaging and talking, etc., there was always some kind of opinion, which probably wasn't intended to be a direction or input, but was taken very much as such. And, they kind of lost their way just a little bit as a result of that. Happily, in looking at that and in realizing that this was an influence, it isn't that you have to go and do something about it or tell Granny and Grandpa they've got to butt out. It's actually being conscious that it is having an influence, and that the discussions that go on around important decisions are made consciously, taking into account, yes, want to honor Granny and Grandpa's amazing achievement, but hang on a minute, we've got this situation now, and we're looking at the future and how this needs to be managed in order to provide a living for the future generations who definitely want it to continue.
Well, and we're going to talk about, and I love the story that you gave here, because this is just one example of many, many others that we'll highlight, I'm sure, just another one or two in some of the stories or case studies that you've done. Before we do that, I just want to let listeners know you are tuned into the Texas Conflict Coach Blog Talk radio program, and I'm talking with Amanda Bucklow from Facilitate. That's F-A-C-I-L-I-T and the number 8 from England, and she is a family business mediator. And so we're talking about family business, and you were just talking about your story, and I'm wondering, for those who are listening in who are family business owners, founders, participants in family member or family business enterprises, how do they begin to identify the trigger points for when to have difficult conversations? In other words, what are some of these early warning signs of emerging problems? And that's way before they bring anybody in like yourself to help. But what do they start to recognize? What do they need to be recognizing?
Well, I think that, the best barometer of the health of a business is changes in behavior. Right? So the first thing that a family business leader should be looking at, are there any sort of significant changes in behavior? So, for example, if you've got a shareholder director who suddenly starts not to make a contribution at board meetings, they're quiet, or they're doing something else, or the same people are saying no to everything. They're just proposals are put on the table where you would expect that person to sort of join in and be sort of quite positive about it. But they just end up sort of saying no. They're exercising their voting rights in that regard. Another indication is if the person is working in the family business and actually has a role rather than maybe just a director or a shareholder, then, is there an increased absenteeism? Are you seeing a difference in the way in which that person approaches problems? It's the behavior, I think, that you should be looking at. And then, to my mind, it's the time for a conversation which family businesses do not make time for proper conversations. It all gets muddled up with the sense that you're having communication, mostly as a family, just conversations generally as a family, and that they're not actually time to sit down and say, hey, what's going on with you? How are things generally?
Which surprises me when you say that, because, in our normal, I do a lot of conflict work in a lot of business, in the corporate world, government world, in some family business, but mostly in the corporate, public sector, private sector. And there's always a lot of the conflict that results after, let's say a conflict's been going on for 5 years, and I might say, so what conversations have you had about this? And they're like, nothing. And so when you say, so that's normal in a lot of the workplaces, people aren't talking about it. But what surprises me is here you have siblings, grandparents, grandkids, brothers, sisters, wife, husband. You think about they would be talking about this all the time. So it kind of surprises me when you say they're not having these conversations. And so that surprises me about that.
Well, let me just give you an example from a very recent mediation. I'm sitting there listening to a large group of 2-3 generations talking, and I'm listening very hard. And at the end of this, I just say, look, I just want to make an observation here. I've been listening to you for a little while now, and what I've noticed is that none of you finish your sentences. And you don't finish your sentences, and you use thing and the phrase an awful lot, right? So as an outsider wanting to glean information, there would be 10 minutes of conversation. I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. And they're all nodding at each other because there was such a desire to agree, such a desire to get on. They did get on incredibly well, or had got on very, very well, and had lots of, family events and sports and all kinds of things were going on. And it had become a habit of this sense of affiliation, which is created by people in conversations of nodding furiously, finishing other people's sentences because that's the way you show that you're on the same page, and saying, a lot, because that's, if you're in my family and you're on my side, then of course you know what I'm talking about, because we're all working for the same thing, aren't we? And actually, the communication style amongst families in business is one of the most important things. And when it can be very nice, very fluid, etc., but it isn't actually communicating. Nobody asks a question to understand instead of to reply.
So talking about questions, when family, those in family business, family members and listeners, you're listening to this conversation, you're like, am I seeing changes in behavior? Am I seeing resistance? Am I seeing negativity? Am I seeing absenteeism? And you're thinking, maybe I should be having a conversation. What are the tough questions family members need to be asking of themselves?
Well, I think one of the first ones is the feeling of isolation and not really acknowledging it. So one of the most important questions is, do I ever feel isolated? And if the answer to that is yes, then that's a flag to that person that there's a one-dimensional information flow for them. And that can be really unhelpful in family business relationships. So what can I do about that? Okay, well, you can actually seek out somebody external to talk to about it and to actually have some reflection. That's one thing that I believe that family business leaders and members need to develop the skill of self-reflection, because the people that work for them are just not brave enough often to confront them with stuff that isn't working. So that's one. Do I ever feel isolated, and what can I do about that? Who can I find that can help me examine the impact and the influence that I might be having at the moment? What's going on with me that might be leaking out into my role as leader or director or whatever? That's one.
Okay.
Then the next one is a particular favourite of mine. It links with what I've just said. Who is my jester? Who is my truth teller? And this comes from a common thing in the Middle Ages here in the UK and Europe and elsewhere in the world. The role of the jester in the courts of the Middle Ages was very much a license given by the king or the queen to say whatever they wanted to. And the power of the king was so absolute that no one dared tell the king anything. But the jester was licensed and given permission to challenge and criticize openly. And they would do it in a funny way, or they do it with songs or whatever. But always there was a permission to challenge. And I think it was Elizabeth I who complained to her jester that he wasn't being cruel enough with her. he wasn't being critical enough. Now, who is the person that is actually telling the truth? That might actually be somebody who's a frontline worker, who is pretty open to the idea of saying, if you go on the shop floor, whatever the shop floor is, and you say to the people on thing, what am I doing that's helpful? That takes a lot of courage, but boy, is it an amazing thing to do. So look at your jester.
Do you find that the jester, looking for your jester, the truth teller, is that someone that can be within the family business, or is it also someone from the outside?
I think the most useful is one from inside the business. Somebody who is who kind of understands and probably hasn't got a huge vested interest. By that I mean they're probably interested in being employed there, or they're probably interested in being there. But they're probably not so worried that there will be massive consequences, like having your bonus cut or something like that. Some of the wisest people are the people who are just around and about, and nobody takes any notice of them. They are observing, and they know an awful lot. So, but it can also be outside. I think the role of jester, if you will, is taken up these days by the mediator, actually. And when you have enough trust and you have the license to tell the truth, that is what we do. We challenge people in a non-confrontational way because we don't have any vested interest. We want everybody to succeed, to have better relationships, to sort out their problems. And when we have that trust and that rapport, then we can really put our fingers on the soft spots. So I think we are the new jesters.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think we are the new jesters, and I think also that a sense of humour, well placed and lightly managed, very carefully done. The sense of humour is one of the most important skills of a mediator.
So tell listeners, because I know we've done shows on family businesses, and there's a lot of family business experts out there. There's the family business advisor. There are technical experts on the technical structure, and then you have the family business mediator. What is the distinction? So if they're saying, man, we need some help, how do they know when to get a mediator versus a family business advisor versus? That can be a little confusing for folks.
Well, this is a great question, actually, Patty, because I was thinking earlier today, what how do you really define what you need? And my most recent mediation really, really clarified that. They'd had some very good work done by strategic people, finance, tax, all those sort of technical things where, you need lawyers and legal knowledge. And they had a very good document output, and it just wasn't working. So the usual advisors are accountants, tax advisors, bankers, and lawyers. But many legal and financial professionals lack the interpersonal and communication skills that I think are needed to work effectively with multi-generational family businesses, or even family businesses. You see, to my mind, if the emotions are not expressed, and there may be many reasons why they're not, if they're not expressed and they're not understood and acknowledged, then the chances of any agreement working are very, very small. So you can do all the best technical work in the world, but if you haven't got a good understanding of the emotional dynamics, then you really are going to be pushing water up a mountain with a fork, as I say.
I love that analogy.
Yeah, and sometimes in mediation it does feel that you are pushing water up a mountain with a fork. But there was some really good research done in the UK by the Society of Trust and Estate Practitioners. I think it's about 2013. And what that research shows, it was done in association with the Institute of Family Business. What that showed was that clients want more of the interpersonal skills like listening, mediation, conflict resolution, and most importantly, the meeting skills that we bring. Because they think they can have meetings, but the habits of very, very formulated meetings, and I often say an agenda, and this is very provocative, so, take it as you will, but I feel very strongly about this. An agenda for a meeting is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth items. They're all the things that everybody knows about. They'll probably be rumbling around for months, if not years. And right at the bottom is something called any other business. Now, if you come to a meeting of mine and I'm running it like that, any other business is item number 1. I want to know what's on everybody's mind as they come into that meeting, because the chances are they are more important in terms of priority, and secondly, they are, if they're not dealt with, and there isn't some sort of outcome for those issues that are on people's minds, they're not listening to what comes next. They're sitting in the meeting waiting for their chance to speak. So managing those meetings, especially in family businesses, requires great skills, and the mediator skills are really good about that. The practice of talking to everybody beforehand, I think that is really important. What's on your mind at the moment? Where are you? And the second thing is letting everybody have a say about what's on their mind, rather than let's deal with item 1 or let's deal with item 2. Somebody with really good listening and interpersonal skills, again, is going to hear unhappiness, emotions, sense of unfairness, sense of lack of appreciation, sense of exclusion. Oh, that is big, in family business. It's a bit like horses. If you're naughty, you're excluded, and you can't come back into the herd until you've said sorry. And those sort of tactics are very, very predominant in family businesses, probably more so than in general corporate work. So, these interpersonal skills.
Yes, and a lot of, dealing with the systems, family dynamics and emotions are all very specialized areas, in particular with family business mediators, because typically those who do family business, or you would hope who would do family business mediation, really specialize and train in all of those dynamics, versus a commercial mediator who's going to deal less with emotions, who's going to pick up less of those dynamics, who are not going to even be able to observe them readily, or even pick that up as one of the major factors or red flags, as you just mentioned earlier. We are actually needing to wrap down at this point, and there's so much to talk about on this. We'll have to have you back on the program again. But I love the fact that a couple of things to highlight, and then I want you to give the listeners who are in family businesses some things to think about as their assignment for the week. But the basic thing that really stood out for me is this sense of isolation and exclusion, and where it gets people stuck. And so that self-reflection question is, do I ever feel isolated as part of the family business if I'm a family member, and how do they self-reflect and most importantly seek help? And then the second question was, who is my jester, a truth teller? And really having the courage to invite that person to give their feedback to you and to be able to listen to that. And of course you equated family business mediators as possibly being that jester or truth teller. So right now, for listeners who are tuned in, what is the next step, that assignment for the week? What is the next step right now? They're listening and they're like, I need to do something about it. What is it you suggest to them to do as the next step?
Well, I think if you're spotting something like this, then your question to yourself might be, how do I start the conversation about succession and management of this business in the future with my father, grandfather, mother, grandmother, or whatever, without rocking the boat or awakening a really difficult sleeping giant? And, the answer to that might be, well, maybe we've got to wake the giant, actually. And who can help me wake the giant and do it in a way where he doesn't start thrashing about and, knocking everybody over, metaphorically speaking. So what kind of advisors do we need to have this conversation more effectively? And that I'm not talking about spending big money. I'm just talking about, okay, well, do we have some emotional issues? Are there people in the business who are feeling unfairly treated? And I will flag this up to your listeners, that family business succession and inheritance are very closely linked. And here in the UK, at least, 35% of wills end up in some kind of litigation. So there is a real motivation here to address succession and the sense of fairness very early on. Now, my advice there is, start with the emotions and start with the relationships, and those are hard to deal with. It's often easier just say, oh well, that's just how she is. And I think if you are the person who's passing on, then I think the question to yourself is, how will I honour and convey the concept of fairness when I decide how the business will be passed on to the next generation? Now,
so how will I honour and convey fairness?
Yeah. How will I honour and convey fairness? Because I believe most people do want to be fair, but their idea of fairness is going to be so different. I think there's a definition of fairness as many people that are on the planet. So the question is to get a sense of what the expectations are of the people who are in line to inherit or take over.
Very good. All right, so listeners, you have your next step to just really start thinking about these things, and also the question, is it time to wake that sleeping giant? Love that metaphor. Amanda, there's a number of ways that people can find you. So what is the best way for them to do that?
Well, I've got a Facebook page, and there's facilitators on Facebook. I love connecting with people on Facebook. I have a website which I think is on the page, which is facilitate.com. I'm very happy to answer questions, and I do mean that. If people want to contact me through the site, they can do. There's a contact form there. I'm very happy to answer questions. And really, Twitter. I think Psychic Vibes works occasionally.
Good. And just to clarify, your Facebook page is Facilitate, which is FACILIT and the number 8. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. And
so when you're typing in Facebook, it's FACILIT 8, the number 8 on the Facebook page. I'm sorry, what else, Amanda?
No, I think I do post interesting things to do with family business there, and articles that deal with the specific kind of psychology of siblings and all that kind of thing, which I find very interesting.
Now, one other thing before we go to the final message is that you and I had talked about that you have a simulation or a case study if people wanted to learn more about what happens in mediation. Where do they go to find that?
Well, they will find that at learning.facilitate.com. So the same way as spelling facilitate. And what that is it is for mediators and it's for people who are interested as users or lawyers as using mediation, and it's a full case study of a family business dispute, actually, which is about a guy who had inherited the business, and actually what he really wanted to do was to be a fiction writer. So that was a very interesting case, and I've replicated that, and you make the decision. So whether you're expert or not, you can actually test your sense of whether or not you've got a handle on how a good meeting should be managed. And that's at learning.facilitate.com. And if any people on your show are interested in that, then send me a note, and there will be a voucher code so they can have a discount on that.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I want to thank you so much for being part of our program. What final message would you like to leave with our listeners tonight?
I'd like your listeners to recognize how huge a contribution family businesses make to the business world. And I would like them to think about, if they know any businesses or if they're working in it, what in a family enterprise, what can they do to help the leader of that business do a better job? What questions could they ask in a nice, non-confrontational way that would send the message to that leader that they are appreciated and what they've done is valuable, and to be of support and assistance to them. Start a better conversation.
Okay, great. Thank you, Amanda, and thank everyone for joining us in the studio, in our chat room, and through our Twitter feed. Really appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you, Patty, for inviting me. It's always a delight to share thoughts with you, and I hope people have learned something. And as I say, if they've got questions when they've thought about it, I really am very happy to answer them.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, and thank you, listeners.
Thank you for listening to the Texas Conflict Coach. We hope you enjoyed the program. You can find all of our podcasts archived to listen at your convenience at texasconflictcoach.com, or download the podcast at iTunes or Stitcher Radio. You can also become a Facebook fan of Conflict Connection, or Twitter me at TX Conflict Coach.